and welcome. I'm Catherine and I was diagnosed with IgA vasculitis 21 years ago, and I received a kidney transplant from my dad 6.5 years ago. And we're joined by Una here today, who is a renal dietitian here in Leicester, and we're going to be talking about some of the issues that were raised on the social media group and things that have come from the analysis of that. And one of them is to do with diet. So we're going to be talking about the issues to do with diet today. Welcome, Una. We found from our analysis in the IgA and nephropathy groups that a large proportion of the posts were to do with salt and salt in the diet. People were a little unsure of how to manage this because they said that salt is in everything. What advice would you give to patients regarding salt within their diet?
Yeah, Catherine, you're right. I mean, there is a lot of salt in the food we eat. About 75% of the salt intake that we get comes from food, and that's actually before we even buy it. So it's already there in the food. Salts can contribute to blood pressure, and people with IgA nephropathy can be more sensitive to salt. So we really need to be careful with how much salt we're having in our diet. What the recommended amount is about 6 grams or less than 6 grams if possible, and that's about a level teaspoon, so it's not very much. But most of the adults in the UK probably consume about 8 grams a day, so quite a lot more than what's recommended.
So that's so interesting, and I think it is really difficult, isn't it, to judge and to see how much salt is in our food. I can see you've brought some food along today. Would you just be able to explain how to see how much salt is in the food? I can see obviously it's got the food labels on it, but sometimes I think they can be a little bit confusing.
Yeah, so the best way to look at how much salt's in your diet is to look at the food labels. A lot of manufacturers have now introduced a traffic light system that you can see here on this chicken and pasta bake. So we've got 3 different sets of lights. So we've got red, we've got green, and we've got amber. So things that are highlighted in red mean they're high. So for salt, that means it's high. So it's more than 1.5 grams. Amber is medium in salt, and the green would indicate that it would be low in salt. So this chicken and pasta bake is high. It's got 1.9 grams.
And it's quite a small
portion.
As well,
yeah. So I mean, you can see that this has almost got 1.9 grams. So that's a third of your actual intake for the day, which is quite a lot. And what we do recommend is trying to cut down on processed foods where possible. But if it's not always an option to do that, then you can look between different brands. So this chicken and pasta bake might be similar to this sort of chicken and potato bake. And you can see that the salt on this one is green, so it's much less. So it's half the salt content. So for a similar portion, you get half the salt. So that would be one way that you could help to cut down on your salt. You might find some products that actually don't have this traffic light system. So what we would recommend is looking at the back of the label. So either in the nutritional analysis, so looking for less than 1.5 grams of salt per portion, or looking at the actual list of ingredients. And if you see salt in there quite high up, then that would indicate there's quite a lot of salt in it, and perhaps to look for a different one.
Oh, okay, so higher up on the list of ingredients.
Yeah, so the higher up is, the more salt there is. The other thing that you can do in terms of looking at labels and looking at foods is to download one of the apps that are available. So there's one called Food Switch, and there's one called
Change for Life.
Change for Life, that's right.
I think I have that,
And those are both really useful. So you can literally just scan the barcode, and it'll either give you, tell you how much salt's in it. So this morning I scanned this one, and it told me that there'd be 4 sachets worth of salt in it, which is quite a lot. When you compare it to those little sachets, it's quite a lot.
And I don't think people would expect that, would they, for such a small portion?
You would never add that much salt to your food, 4 sachets.
Especially when you're going to be eating other things throughout the day as well.
Yeah, definitely. And also, it might give you, so the Food Switch will give you an alternative. So you could scan it, see which one would be a better alternative, and you could go for that one.
That's really interesting. So we can see that it's easy for people to potentially have quite a lot of salt in their diet. Some of it's hidden, and it's hard to sometimes see the salt in things. But obviously we know for patients with IgA nephropathy, it's really important to control your salt intake because that's related a lot to blood pressure.
You're right, yeah. So I mean, We do know that for everybody, having too much salt can affect our blood pressure, which is not good for us. Especially for people with IgA nephropathy, we really need to be careful and help to control that blood pressure. And in order to do that, we need to reduce the salt as much as possible.
So how would you recommend we reduce the amount of salt in our diet?
Well, a simple thing you can do at home is to add less salt when you're cooking, and to also try and not have salt at the table. By doing those two things and adding less salt to the food really helps. Some people might find that quite hard to do initially, but if you add just a little bit less every day, over a couple of weeks you will become accustomed to the taste of having less salt in your food, and you might actually find that you can taste the food better and you enjoy your food more. Another thing that you could do is to use less processed foods. So we've already talked about the labels, but something simple like pasta sauces. So I've got some pasta sauces here, for example. So both of these are processed pasta sauces. You might think that this one being fresh might be better in terms of salt, but actually they both have the same amount of salt. So the whole jar for both of these are about 2 grams of salt each, which is quite a lot. So I mean, I guess you wouldn't probably eat the whole amount of that in one go, but it's still quite a lot of salt. So what you could do is perhaps make your own. So I mean, something as simple as having a can of tomatoes, some garlic, some carrot, some basil, onion and some dried herbs. You could make a really nice pasta sauce. You could even batch cook maybe and put some in the freezer for another time, so it's an instant ready meal that you've done yourself. And by doing that, you reduce the salt by about 10 times. So it's a really significant. Yeah, and if you've got these things at home already, then you actually might find it might even be cheaper as well. You can put some extra veg in as well to bulk it out and improve your 5 a day.
Yeah, and because of all of those are fresh, there is no hidden salt, is there, when you're making it yourself? You
know exactly what goes in. You can put as much garlic in as you like. You can tailor it to your own needs. So it's really a really nice way of reducing the salt content.
Yeah.
So you might find actually, if you want to look at some recipes online, you can find lots of different recipes, and places like the British Heart Foundation do a lot of recipes for low salt. If you look under blood pressure, you can find hundreds of recipes there. Also, Kidney Care UK have got a kidney kitchen which have recipes for kidney patients, and most of these have no added salt, so they're really nice recipes to try. Some people think about using different types of salt, so there's like Himalayan salt, pink salt, black salt, sea salt, lots of different types of salts. They're all salt at the end of the day, and they all affect your blood pressure in the same way. And actually, we just need to cut down on salt. Some people actually get low salt, which is lower in sodium, so it will help with the sodium content, but actually it doesn't help you kick the habit of eating salty food. And low salt's got quite a lot of potassium, so if you're on a potassium restriction, then it's best not to have it. So what we recommend is just trying to cut down as much as possible.
So you mentioned about low salt, the salt substitute, although it's got less sodium in it, it has a high potassium content, which isn't great for kidney patients and IgA nephropathy patients. Can you advise on a potassium diet and the sorts of foods that potassium is in?
Yeah, so you're right, definitely we would advise all kidney patients to avoid any salt substitutes because of potassium content. Not all patients with IgA nephropathy will need to follow a low potassium diet, and I would imagine that if people do need to follow a low potassium diet, that they'll be advised by their doctor and they'll be referred to see a dietitian who can advise them appropriately on which foods they need to avoid. We wouldn't want patients with IgA nephropathy following a low potassium diet unless they were really needing to. It can be quite a restrictive diet, so we wouldn't want people cutting foods out unnecessarily.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that I struggled with before my transplant, and I did have to stick to it quite rigidly, but it is quite restrictive, and it is quite hard, especially when you're eating with other people, and it is quite a hard diet. So, but yeah, definitely, I spoke with a renal dietitian and my doctor, and just to find out more about the foods that potassium's in, and some of them are quite shocking, aren't they? Things like jacket potatoes and things like that. So yeah. It's really interesting.
You're right. I mean, it can be a restrictive diet, but hopefully your dietitian will be able to work with you to make sure that you still have some of the foods that you enjoy, perhaps in smaller quantities, or perhaps maybe amending what you have with it, what you serve with it. And if anybody does follow a low potassium diet, then they can look at the Kidney Kitchen, which is from Kidney Care UK, because they've got recipes that are some that are coded for low potassium and some that are not, but there's lots of recipes there definitely you can have a look at.
Definitely, no, that's so interesting. And obviously every kidney patient is different as well. So like you said, it's really important for them to talk to a dietitian
and
and
get
the doctor
an
and work
individualised
together.
plan. Yeah,
Definitely. So there's been a lot of discussion in the social media group around a high protein diet, with some patients stating that they'd been told by their doctor to avoid a high protein diet. Is there any advice that you'd give to people regarding protein in their diet?
Exactly. So there's lots of controversy around protein and how much you should or how much you shouldn't eat. What we actually recommend would be to have a moderate amount of protein, so not too much, not too little. And what we recommend is about 2 to 3 portions a day of protein. What you do need to look at for protein is the portion size. So often people eat too much protein, and that's because they're not aware of what a portion size is.
Yeah, how would you recommend people kind of seeing the portion size that they should have?
So there's lots of resources available online which have some visual ways of looking at portion size, and those links will be in the information below. But as a rough guide, I mean, what we say for white meat, red meat and oily fish would be to sort of have a portion size of your palm. For white fish, we'd say about the portion size of your hand. For cooked beans and lentils, we say a sort of good handful or 6 tablespoons of lentils or beans. And for things like cheese, we'd say sort of 2 thumbs. So those are quite easy to remember, and they're also quite individualised. So obviously somebody that's bigger than me will need more protein than me, but they will have bigger hands, so their portion size will naturally be bigger anyway.
Yeah.
Some things that we do recommend for protein is to try and have more plant-based protein, so things like beans, lentils, pulses. And we know that because it's good for our health, and sort of it's good for sustainability as well. So I mean, you could do something as simple as having, perhaps if you're making a spaghetti bolognese, when you make the bolognese, maybe replace half of the meat with some lentils, or the same when you do a chili con carne, and that will just help to moderate the amount of protein that you're having from that meal.
Yeah, so there's always substitutes that you can add to meals just to bulk it out a bit more if you are taking, for instance, meat out.
Yeah, so if you want to reduce the amount of meat, then you could replace it with vegetables, you could replace it with corn, you could replace it with lentils.
Which are brilliant because they're all natural things as well, aren't they?
Yeah.
So all healthy for us.
Definitely. Another thing that's recommended actually is to cut back on the amount of processed meats. So things like bacon, sausages, pate, ham, and we're recommended to do that because these are quite detrimental to our health in terms of cancer risk. So we, if possible, try and remove those where we can, and if not, try and limit the amount to about 70 grams a day. So quite small portion sizes of those.
Yeah. Thanks, Una. That was really, really interesting. So there is another video on myths in IgA nephropathy, but one of the things that was widely talked about in the social media groups was a gluten-free diet. What's your opinion on that?
So there have been lots of studies done with gluten-free diets and IgA nephropathy, and at the minute there's not really any evidence to say that following a gluten-free diet will have any impact. So we don't necessarily recommend it. I do know that some people probably will still follow a gluten-free diet regardless of the lack of evidence. And if they do, what I would say is just to perhaps discuss it with your doctor or your dietitian, just to make sure that you're having a fully balanced diet and that you're not cutting out lots of food groups and having an unbalanced diet. There will be people with IgA nephropathy who have to follow a gluten-free diet for medical reasons. So people like people with celiac disease or dermatitis or petiformis, and these people should continue to follow a gluten-free diet as they've already been advised by their healthcare professional.
Thank you, Una. That was so interesting. One of the final things that we just wanted to talk about that was raised a lot within the IgA nephropathy groups was related to people managing their weight and how that would have an effect upon their IgA nephropathy.
Yeah, so people that are overweight, it can have a detrimental effect to their kidney function. We would recommend that people try and aim to be a healthy weight. And obviously that will help if they're thinking about things like transplant. So trying to be a healthy weight for transplant is really important. If you are overweight and you're ready to make some changes, there are some simple things that you can do. So, I mean, exercise is one, definitely. It's good to help burn off calories and help you with the weight loss. It's good for general health overall, things like your blood pressure, and mentally it's quite good. You know, it gives you a mental well-being. So you could also look at how much fat and sugar you're having in your diet and try to reduce that where possible. Look at your portion size, so when you're serving up your plate, perhaps cut down on the amount of carbohydrate you're having and perhaps have some more vegetables as well, and that will help to reduce the amount of calories that you're taking in. And the other thing that we recommend is to try and go for small, sustainable, achievable goals. So perhaps just setting yourself small targets each week that are achievable. So maybe ½ to 2 pounds a week maximum weight loss is what you should be aiming for, and hopefully that will be achievable, and then you can feel confident that you've lost some weight, and that will help you continue your journey with weight loss. And the other thing is, if you're struggling with weight loss, you could always ask to be referred to your dietitian for further advice.
Yeah, because it's not really great, is it, if people, if people do want to lose weight, it's not good to lose weight really quickly, is it? It's good to do it, like you said, moderately, and, like you said, maybe a couple of pounds a week, but not a great lot in a short amount of time.
Definitely, we would sort of advise against any crash diets or any extreme diets where you're cutting out whole food groups. We'd recommend that you take a sort of balanced approach. You're still having a healthy diet and you're achieving small amounts, regularly of weight loss. And this will help in the long run, because we know that if you do a crash diet and you lose lots of weight, often you will just put that back on again very quickly. So small sustained amounts of weight loss are recommended.
Thank you so much, Una, for joining us today. It's been really useful to talk all about the issues that we discussed. We hope you found that really helpful and really useful. Some of the things that we've talked about today have been salt in your diet, gluten, understanding food labels, weight management, and we've talked about protein as well. If you need any more information, you can visit the Kidney Care UK website. And thank you very much for joining us.